I know. Has the appearance of looking like it's cracked. They call them crinkle cones, but they're delicious. They are always like a brownie.
Yeah. That's when you know. But because they get messy.
They do.
When I packed it up, so I did a cranberry orange. Today, next way cake, lemon melt away, spritz ginger snap sandwiches,
A long time ago, I used to sing in the choir. Before kids. Actually, I was pregnant. And now the one I'm pregnant with is 19. You? What department?
I really like it.
And she's your best friend now.
Oh, she is.
Okay, I can see that. That's a nice area.
Well, it's a new spot for us. Now that we're giving it Thank you, dear. Well, enjoy your trip.
Hello, John. How are you doing?
All right.
How much time is there for your Christmas?
I have on tennis shoes.
Which one do you want? It's a regular. Oh, just regular thrashing. Oh, so that was your basher house. Yeah, we downsized. I leveled the master here. Six, seven, seven.
No, 5.
Did you have that many
Lessons. I'd like to adopt them way back there. And the boys. If I
One minus.
Good evening and Merry Christmas to you.
Merry Christmas.
Thank you so much. We're delighted to have us here at Haymarket Baptist Church. We're so pleased to see a lot of guests with us tonight as well. If you are the person seated on the pew closest to the center aisle, would you take the little black book that should be right next to you and sign in, and then pass it to the outside and give us your name and some sort of contact, either a home address or an email address, phone number, whatever you feel comfortable sharing, and send it to the outside. And once everyone has signed in, and the last person has done that, then send it back and leave it right there on the center aisle where it started. We would appreciate that very, very much. Tonight, we of course focus on Christmas Eve, the birth of Jesus Christ, and we're also going to have the Lord's Supper. It's a tradition here. Some of you might think, well, wait, I thought that was in the springtime, when we celebrate the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. But tonight we're going to tie together both the birth of Jesus Christ, celebrating Christmas, but also with in mind that he eventually had to die on the cross and be resurrected from the dead. And so we'll do that when we share the Lord's Supper. Now, we don't limit the Lord's Supper to members of this church or just to Baptists. If you know Christ as Lord and Savior, we invite you to share the Lord's Supper with us toward the end of the service. And then after we share the Lord's Supper, then we'll invite you to go outside, and we will end by singing outside Silent Night. And the deacons will hand you an electric little candle, battery operated, for you to illuminate the outside of the church. And so we invite you to do that at the very end of the service. But we have a lot of folks here, and so I'm going to ask everyone, both in the sanctuary and the overflow room, to stand and greet those around you. Let's all stand and greet those around you.
Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas.
Years ago, discussed with Olson about what do you do at Christmas when so many of the members of the church send us Christmas cards, and some of you have given us gifts. We can try to write cards to all of you, but then inevitably you miss some people, and you get a bunch of our members, but they attend, and there's other members who don't come, but you send them a card. And so what we decided many years ago was, instead of sending any of you cards, what we're going to do is give you all one gift. And so let me present that gift to you as a congregation right now. Debbie Nelson has worked very hard this past year to develop our church library. It's in a room right behind the choir loft. And so I looked through the library, and it seemed like one volume, one set that we do not have is a set of 4 volumes, dictionaries of the New Testament. I'll just pull one out. It's called the Dictionary of Jesus and the Gospels. And it's got everything you'd ever want to know about Jesus or Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, or any of the characters that show up in the Gospels. There's also a volume about Paul and his letters. There's another volume of the later New Testament writings like 1st and 2nd Peter, Jude, Revelation. And there is a 4th volume on the backgrounds to the New Testament. If you wanted to know about the Pharisees or the Sadducees, or Herod the Great, who was he? All that information is in these 4 dictionaries about the New Testament. And so we'll place these in the library this coming week. And that is our gift to you, to say thank you for all the wonderful things that you have done for Linda and for me.
Thank you.
Now we begin to shift our focus away from Christmas presents and greeting one another to focusing on God. So I'll ask you to bow with me as we pray. Lord, it's an exciting time for us. For many of us, Christmas might be the most exciting time of all. The children are often wondering what they're going to receive beneath the tree. Adults are thinking about who we're going to see at Christmas Day, friends and family members. It is a joyous time, but we would be terribly remiss, Father, if we focused on all these things, good though they may be, but truly secondary things, and we forgot about the reason for Christmas itself. The greatest gift ever given, the birth of your Son, Jesus Christ. And we are so thankful for that gift that you sent to us, the birth of that little baby 2,000 years ago in the stable, placed in the manger. And Father, tonight, we want to give you thanks throughout this worship service. Thanks for the most wonderful Christmas present that we have ever received. And it's in Jesus' name that we pray. Amen.
Amen.
We'll ask you to stand. You don't even need to get the hymnals. All the words for everything we're singing tonight are in your program. But let's stand. Let's stand way in the manger.
Amen.
Throughout this season, we have lived, waited, and remembered the hope, peace, joy, and love of God found in Christ. Tonight we gather together and light candles in honor of the Christ child.
With the birth of Christ, salvation has drawn near. The God who ordered the chaos of the universe has come down into the chaos of our world.
The Word which was with God at the beginning came down and lived with us, while we were yet living in the valley of the shadow of death, and the light of the new burst forth.
We light this candle for Christ. On this night, we remember God has come in the Christ child.
Good evening and Merry Christmas. We're going to have our first scripture reading at this time. We'll be reading John, the first chapter, verses 9 through 13. If you're sitting in the main sanctuary here in the Red Pew Bibles, that's page 1647. And if you're out in the overflow area in the Black Bible, that is page 1509. And I'll be reading from the New International Version. The true light that gives light to every man was coming into the world. He was in the world, and though the world was made through him, the world did not recognize him. He came to that which was his own, but his own did not receive him. Yet to all who received him, to those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God, children born not of natural descent, nor of human decision or a husband's will, but born of God.
We would now like to invite all the children in the sanctuary and the children in the overflow room to come forward for the children's story. Merry Christmas, boys and girls.
Merry Christmas, Pastor Mark.
It is good to see all of you here today. We are delighted to have you here. And I've got a story for you, of course, about Jeffrey and Lisa. I always have a story. Oh, we have another friend. Come on over. It's so nice to have you. Oh, we want to stick close to Daddy. That's fine. That's fine. You can stay right there. Just fine. Sometimes daddies especially like having their little girls with them. I miss having my little girls with me. One's 1,000 miles away and the other's in Australia, 10,000 miles away. So I wish I could have one of my little girls sitting right next to me. But I have a story for you today about Jeffrey and Lisa. On this particular day, Jeffrey got back home and he was talking to Lisa. And he said, I went to my friend Mike's house, and Mike is from Korea, and we went and they had a Christmas tree, and they had a creche, a little tree, you know, that's the little stable, and the manger, and there's Mary and Joseph and the wise men, and they had the shepherds, and then baby Jesus. And he said, Mary and Joseph and baby Jesus looked like they were Korean. Jesus wasn't from Korea, was he? Lisa said, well, no, I don't think so. I went to one of my friends' homes, and she had a blonde, blue-eyed baby Jesus. But I've never met anyone from the Middle East that has blonde hair and blue eyes. Let's ask Mom and Dad about this. And so they went and asked Mom and Dad about why they had these different-looking baby Jesuses under the different trees. And Mom and Dad said, well, you know, people all around the world sort of like to feel that Jesus is a lot like them. And so in every country, people often make their pictures of Jesus to look just like them because we have no photographs of Jesus. There are no paintings of Jesus. We don't know exactly what he looked like. And so all around the world, people tend to make their baby Jesus and Mary and Joseph look a lot like them. And then Lisa said, but Mom and Dad, he had to look like somebody and not everybody. What do you think he really looked like? And Dad spoke up. He said, well, Jesus was from the Middle East. And so he probably looks a lot like people from the Middle East look. And Jeffrey said, I have a friend in my class from Jordan. That's in the Middle East. And my friend has dark hair and dark eyes and sort of light brown skin. And Dad said, yeah, Jesus probably looked a little bit like your friend there from Jordan. How about that? But let's remember that Jesus came for people in Korea. And Jesus came for people from Sweden. And Jesus came for people from Nigeria and Brazil and Nepal and Canada and Mexico. And everywhere all over the world, Jesus came so that they could be saved. And so Christmas is a time when people all over the globe can celebrate the wonderful birth of Jesus Christ. Let's have a prayer. Father, I thank you for all the children here, children around the world, and we pray that they can all hear the saving truth about the birth of Jesus Christ, who came to earth for them. It's in his name we pray. Amen. Time to go back with Mom and Dad. base my sermon, in addition to the passage that John Burke read a few minutes ago, is from John chapter 1, verse 14, just a single verse. It is in your pew Bibles, the red pew Bible 1647, and the black pew Bibles, page 1509. Some scholars say it's the most important verse in the entire Bible. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us, and we have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son, who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. This is the Word of God for the people of God.
Thanks be to God.
Here's a story from one of my favorite Christian authors, Philip Yancey. Once, for a 2-week period, I was snowbound in a mountain cabin in Colorado. Blizzards closed all the roads, and I had nothing to do but read the Bible. And I went through it slowly, page by page. In the Old Testament, I found myself identifying with those who boldly stood up to God. Moses, Job, Jeremiah, Habakkuk, and the psalmists. As I read, I felt I was watching a play with human characters who acted out their lives in small triumph and large tragedy on stage, while periodically calling to an unseen stage manager, "You don't know what it's like out here." Job was the most brazen, flinging to God this accusation, "Do you have eyes of flesh? Do you see as a mortal sees?" Every so often I could hear the echo of a booming voice from far off stage behind the curtain. "Yeah, and you don't know what it's like back here either," it said to Moses and the prophets, and most loudly to Job. When I got to the Gospels, however, the accusing voices stilled. God, if I may use such language, found out what life is like in the confines of planet Earth. Jesus got acquainted with grief in person, in a brief, troubled life not far from the dusty plains where Job had traveled. Of the many reasons for the incarnation, surely one was to answer Job's accusation. "Do you have eyes of flesh?" And for a time, God did. When we think of Jesus' birth, we think about light, Christmas lights. How many of you have taken trips around different neighborhoods to see beautiful lights around the Haymarket? Lots of us have done that. Lots of us. It's beautiful to see at Christmas time. And then, of course, our college students came up to light the Christ candle, along with the other 4 candles that we have lit. And beneath every Christmas tree that has a creche, there is always the wise men who came by the light of what? Star. Light plays such an important role at Christmas time. What does the Gospel of John say about the light? In verse 9, first chapter, John says, "The true light that gives light to everyone was coming into the world." And Jesus came as the true light, so that all of us could be enlightened, so we could have a new understanding. Imagine, instead of coming here tonight, that you had gone to a little country church, way out in the country. It's a dark night, maybe there's no moon out, there's no stars. But the little country church has put in some bright lights in the parking lot, and so you pull in there, and you have a wonderful Christmas Eve service. And then at the end of the service, since you're parked right under a bright light, you don't even think about turning your lights on. You just back up and pull out in the little country road. But as soon as you're out of that parking lot, you're in total darkness. And you quickly reach down and turn on your lights, and boom! Everything's illuminated. There's that deer that was walking right in front of you, aren't you? You're glad you turned the lights on. But sudden illumination, that's what Jesus Christ brings to us. He enlightens everything. We can see in a way we could not see before because of what Jesus Christ did. But remember, this gospel was written by who? John. I always start off with the easy questions. Those of you who are guests need to know that. Later I have tougher questions, but I start with the easy ones. So Gospel of John was written by? John. There you go. You got it. Okay. John had spent several years, maybe 3 years, traveling around with Jesus. And he firmly believed that Jesus had enlightened him and other disciples as well. But he had seen other things. He was right there at the beginning of Jesus' ministry when people in Jesus' hometown rejected him. Some of them even wanted to throw him off a cliff. So much for the light, huh? Some people said, forget it, I don't believe this guy at all. He's just a carpenter's son. And then a lot of the religious leaders, like pretty much all the Sadducees, rejected Jesus. He was a challenge to their authority and their power and their wealth. And there were others who loved the Bible just like Jesus did, and even agreed with him on some of his interpretations, but he irritated them a lot when he pointed out their lack of insight into their own sin. The group I call the Pharisees. And a lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of them rejected Jesus. They rejected the light. There was a rich young ruler. John was there when Jesus said, come and follow us. We could have had 13 apostles, couldn't we? But what did the young man do? The rich young ruler turned and he walked away from Jesus. He rejected the light. The Jewish high priest, who supposedly would know so much about God, Annas and Caiaphas, they rejected Jesus as well. The Roman governor, Pontius Pilate, did not believe in Jesus. And most of all, one of Jesus' own hand-picked apostles, Judas Iscariot, rejected Jesus as well. The true light coming into the world, absolutely. Did everyone accept it? No way. A lot of people said, I don't accept that light in any way. And so John put it down this way. Talking about Jesus, he said, he was in the world, and though the world was made through him, the world did not recognize him. He came to that which was his own, but his own did not receive him. Nevertheless, in spite of the rejection by so many people, John was firmly convinced that Jesus came not just as a great prophet, and not even just as the Messiah, though he was certainly that, but John had become convinced that in the birth of Jesus Christ and in his life, God had come in the flesh. And he wrote this verse down. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us, and we have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. The Word became flesh. The great Swiss theologian Karl Barth, who wrote 9,000 pages called Church Dogmatics. I've got them in my office if you want to read them and you're having trouble sleeping. You can borrow those. They're really tough sledding. I find them difficult to read because they're so dense, so thick. But if you look at the very last volume, he's got an index to all the different verses in the Bible that he refers to. Thousands and thousands of references throughout the 9,000 pages. And the verse that gets the greatest attention from this brilliant theologian, probably the most important theologian of the 20th century, is John 1:14. I know some of you were thinking John 3:16. That's a good one too. We'll get to that in a few weeks. But Karl Barth thought this verse was the most important in all of Scripture. The Word became flesh and lived or dwelled among us. The very God who created the world wanted to fully experience what it was like to be human. So he came to earth in the form of a child born to commoners, Mary and Joseph. Now I searched for analogies, because analogies can sometimes help us understand things. But of course there's no true analogy to God coming to earth. I mean, there's not other times that has happened. But a friend of mine who's a sports writer in Winston-Salem told me this story. He's been there since 1978. He was there when this happened. And I think it gives a little bit of insight of the clash of one thing coming into another world. In 1984, there were a bunch of guys playing basketball in a gym in Winston-Salem. Most of them came there regularly. Some of them were pretty good players. Some of them played in high school. A few of them had played in college. And it was a pretty good level of basketball there. They had the local stars, the guys who could hit three-point shots. They had some of the big guys, 6'5", 6'6", that could score on the inside. And they had games that went to a certain number of points, sometimes maybe 10 or so. And then when the winning team finished, they'd stay on the court, the losing team would leave, and whoever had come in the door would say, we got next. And that's how it went, night after night. But also in 1984, in that particular week, James Worthy, who was an All-American at the University of North Carolina, and had gone to the LA Lakers, and was a superstar, along with Magic Johnson and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, one of the greatest pro basketball teams ever to play. James Worthy was marrying a girl from Winston-Salem. And so he flew into town, and several of his Laker buddy superstars flew in also. They wanted to be at James's wedding, of course. And there were all sorts of events for them to go to, cake cuttings and dinners and so forth. But one evening was free, and I don't know which one of them said it, but one of them said, hey, let's go shoot some hoop at the local gym. And so here you are in the local gym, you're the local superstar, and you're playing and your team's winning, and suddenly the Los Angeles Lakers walk in the back door and say, we got next. And the local guys are like, oh my gosh, it's James Worthy, it's all the Lakers. And the greatest basketball gods, if I could use that term loosely, walk into their gym and they're like, wow, what stories they told that night when they got home. How did you play tonight, honey? My shot got blocked 6 times. Why are you smiling? Because it was James Worthy who blocked my shot. I played against the Lakers tonight. Multiply that by 1,000. And that's how we should feel about God coming to earth in the form of a little baby. It just blows us away. Now, God had a purpose for that beyond impressing us. And forgive my bringing a little academia into the sermon, but I do this occasionally, not all the time. John wrote his first prologue, the first 18 verses, in the form of what's called the chiastic pattern. Instead of our outline form where we go A and then B and C and D and E and then we're done, a chiastic pattern goes through a certain number of points and then reverses course and goes in the opposite direction. In this particular case, you've got it as a bulletin insert, it goes A, B, C, D, and then reverses and goes C prime, B prime, A prime. But the key is for a chiastic pattern, the middle piece almost always gives you the purpose of the whole thing. And so if you take a look, the middle piece is what verses? 12 and 13. And so if we look at those 2 verses, here's what it says. Yet to all who did receive him, to those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God. Children born not of natural descent, nor of human decision or a husband's will, but born of God. That is the reason that God came in the form of that little baby. Not so we could ooh and ah, although that's fun, but because that little baby was going to grow up and launch a ministry that brought a message of God's kingdom and God's power to people all over the Middle East. And then followers would take that message all over the Roman world and then later all over the entire globe. That is the reason that God came in the flesh. That is the reason for the incarnation. Now, John tells us the rest of the story, and between now and Easter, I'll be preaching all the way through the Gospel of John. And I encourage you to come and hear the sermons, and even more important, read in your Bibles the Gospel of John between now and Easter. Hear the rest of the story. But the most important piece you've already heard tonight. The Word became flesh and lived among us. And at the end of his ministry, after he'd grown up and launched the ministry and gone out and done the miracles and challenged people and had conflict with the Pharisees that I've already mentioned, at the end of his life, that same little baby would become Jesus Christ, the Son of the carpenter. He went to Jerusalem. And because he had challenged the authority of the Jewish leaders, and the Roman leaders felt challenged as well, he got nailed to a cross, executed for daring to challenge the authority of the powers that be. And it seemed like the end of a fairy tale, a terrible disaster. as he died on the cross. But 3 days later, on Easter Sunday morning, on the third day, God raised him from the dead. And that is how John came to understand that Jesus really was God incarnate, really was the Messiah, really did come with a true message of salvation for all of us who accept the light, all of us who believe in him. And so that's the reason that tonight, in addition to celebrating the birth of Jesus Christ, which we do, we're also going to remember the death of Jesus Christ and the resurrection. And we're going to do that by celebrating the Lord's Supper as soon as we sing one more Christmas hymn. We're going to stand and sing Joy to the World, and then we'll share the Lord's Supper together. Let's all stand. Word.
Glory
Jesus died, he shared a Passover meal with his disciples. And at the end of the meal, he took the bread. And when he'd given thanks, he broke it and gave it to them, saying, "This is my body, which is for you. Do this in remembrance of me." Jesus said, this cup is the new covenant in my blood. Do this as often as you drink it. In memory of me. Now we're going to have a deacon at each door. And we will be passing out little candles, battery-operated candles, to every one of you. We're going to ask that half of you go out the back door and half of you go to the door. We're going to gather right out of this side of the church, the right side, and here on this side, to my left. We'll gather right around the sidewalk, a giant square, and we will sing Silent Night. That's excellent.
Yeah, you really
I wasn't going to get